Hello there, GB here, and welcome to Fast Forward, where I follow up on episodes of Rewind classic movies to look at what happened after those iconic films came out. Today, we're diving back into the perilously paranormal, proton-packed, poltergeist-filled world of Ghostbusters to look at everything from the slimy 89 sequel and how you can enjoy the third film that was never made, to the inverted female foursome and latest pair of movies, as well as comics, video games, and more. So let's fire up our proton packs and dive into everything after 1984, starting with Ghostbusters 2? No, not a fucking chance. It took years for that sequel to come out. What came next was the Real Ghostbusters. The Real Ghostbusters. This cartoon gave younger audiences their dose of ghostbusting. It expanded the lore, introduced Slimer as a friendly sidekick, and offered colourful new ghosts. The show ran for 140 episodes and included some darker episodes, balancing comedy and supernatural elements. But why was it called The Real Ghostbusters when it was clearly anything but? Well, it was to distinguish it from a different animated Ghostbusters series that had nothing to do with the 1984 movie. That Ghostbusters even had its own theme song, which couldn't be more different to the Ray Parker Jr. hit. But I warn you, once you hear it, it's going to be in your head all day.
Let's go, Ghostbusters!
While we're talking about theme songs, I'm sure you want to hear the one from the 1975 live-action TV show that caused all the legal drama for the first movie. Here you go.
We're the Ghostbusters. I'm Spencer. He's Tracy. I'm Kong.
There are also two ongoing Real Ghostbusters comics and a line of toys from Kenner. In 2023, events from the series would be adapted for the canon video game Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed. A little bit more on that later. Ghostbusters 2. Even though the first movie was a huge success, it would take 5 years for the sequel to come out. There were all sorts of behind-the-scenes troubles with the studio that are a bit boring, but the main reason was the actors took 3 years to want to make a follow-up, and when they did, they weren't all available, and Bill Murray was tied up with Scrooge. I was 8 years old when I saw this and remember it vividly because it was the first film I saw in the cinema, and it had an incredible marketing campaign that included ghosts in cans of drink at places like wimpy restaurants. There were TV adverts showing kids opening these cans and ghosts coming out. And I remember thinking, they must be awesome, but I never had one. I've just seen the advert and looked into it a little bit, and it just seems there's nothing at all. It was just a gimmick that was as close as possible to selling an air guitar. They were seemingly recycling empty cans of Coke, although some people in the UK swear they had glowing insides. But after the success of the first movie and the cartoon, which drew in a lot of younger fans to the franchise, Ghostbusters 2 found itself being a bit dumbed down and adapted for that younger audience to maximise its appeal. So no sex scenes with Playboy ghosts in this one. And you only have to look at Janine's transformation to see what they were trying to do. Anyway, while all the cast and director Ivan Reitman returned, there was one key person who didn't, cinematographer Laszlo Kovacs. As AJ and I talk about in the Rewind episode, Laszlo was responsible for creating such an incredible look to the first movie, and his absence on 2 means the film looks less like a wacky but believable documentary and more like a Hollywood movie. Also out was the brilliant music of Elmer Bernstein. Dan Aykroyd's original script was, like the first movie, drastically stripped back from what he imagined, and now the team battle rivers of slime, a nanny ghost, and a bloke in a painting, instead of the original plot, which saw Dana being kidnapped and taken to Scotland, where she discovers a ring of mushrooms that leads to an underworld. And our Ghostbusters have to travel 2,000 miles over multiple days to rescue her. Sounds exciting. But the underground element remained, unlike the original father of Oscar, the kidnapped baby, who was meant to be the offspring of Dana and Venkman. But Murray thought it would mess with the Ghostbusters team dynamics too much. I love how the movie opens with the Ghostbusters not being heroes anymore and the reality of life after the defeat of Gozer. It reminds me a little bit of another great movie, The Last Jedi. Added to the cast is Peter MacNicol as the quirky and creepy Janosch, Bill Murray's brother as the psychiatric doctor that locks them up, Cheech Marin of Cheech and Chong as the doc supervisor, and Max von Sydow as the voice of bad boy villain Vigo. One person who didn't know what role von Sydow would have is Wilhelm von Homburg, who played the visual representation of Vigo and had no idea he was going to be dubbed, and walked out of the premiere when you realised. Wilhelm, whose real name was Norbert Group, and you might also recognise as one of the henchmen in Die Hard a year earlier, had an incredible life story. His drunkard dad was in Hitler's Nazi army and worked at a concentration camp as a baker and a boxer before both he and his son moved to America working as a wrestling tag team, and even crossed paths with Arnold Schwarzenegger. After switching to boxing, Norbert became known as the German Muhammad Ali, but was once disqualified from a world title fight for headbutting his opponent. He'd refer to himself as Prince and walk around in large fur coats, smoking cigars, and just loved the attention of the paparazzi. This was at a time when he lived in the red light district, went to brothels, and hung out with pimps, dealers, and Hell's Angels. In his life, he would spend several years in prison, once for selling weed to an undercover cop, and later in the 80s for violence and aiding prostitution. Ghostbusters 2 executive producer Michael C. Gross once called him a crude, bigoted arsehole. And I almost forgot the part where he was potentially thought to be the father of his stepsister after his dad accused him of raping his own stepmother. Von Homburg spent the last years of his life pretty homeless, alternating between sleeping at a YMCA, in the homes of his friends, or in his van. He developed prostate cancer and died in 2004 in Mexico, aged just 63. We also get a cameo from a very young Jason Reitman, son of the director, at the children's party where the Ghostbusters get abused, a key experience that would see him return in 30 years or so to direct the follow-up to this movie. More on that to come. Now, this film was largely a copy of the first in structure, and the production was a mess, with numerous scenes being cut, including one with Eugene Levy as Louis Tully's cousin, who helps the Ghostbusters escape the psychiatric hospital, while other scenes were added, and the whole thing never really met expectations, with Bill Murray himself saying it was unsatisfying and wasn't the film they were meant to be making. But it did give us memorable moments like the Scoleri brothers court scene, the pink underground tunnels, the mood slime in a toaster, and the Statue of Liberty striding through New York to Jackie Wilson's Higher and Higher. It got mixed reviews, and on a budget of $35 million, it made over $215 million, which was a bit behind the $280 million the original made. There were plenty of merch and toy spin-offs, but the film's inability to recreate the magic of the first film, both with critics and at the box office, meant a follow-up would remain in production hell for almost 30 years. And there would be worse news for fans waiting and wanting the sequel. When it finally arrives, it's going to be dog shit. Extreme Ghostbusters. With the movie's future up in the air, Ghostbusters continued on TV in 1997 with a new animated series called Extreme Ghostbusters. Set a few years after the Real Ghostbusters, the team have split up, with Egon staying at the Firehouse, watching the containment unit and looking after Slimer. It featured a team of college-age Ghostbusters led by Spengler, which includes one young Alfonso Ribeiro, yes, Carlton, from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It spawned several video games, but only lasted one season. The Lost Third Movie. Aykroyd had been working on ideas for Ghostbusters 3 for a while, and throughout the 90s was writing a script likened to Ghostbusters of the Next Generation, with a new, younger team, which he hoped would include Chris Farley, Jeff Daniels and Will Smith as Ghostbusters. Other actors considered were Leonardo DiCaprio, Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Chris Rock, Ben Stiller, and even Alec Baldwin as a villain. It would have involved, at one point, an older adult Oscar, son of Dana, and Dan Aykroyd wanted a short role for Bill Murray, but neither Murray, Weaver, or Ivan Reitman were that interested. At one point, Bill Murray said that he would only do the movie if his character was killed off in the first few minutes and then becomes a ghost. Now, there's so many decades of what-ifs and ideas and rewrites, but one story would have taken them to Manhattan, a bizarre infernal mirror of Manhattan ruled by a devil-like entity probably named Lucifer. This alternate version of New York is populated by demonic citizens, twisted version of landmarks, and surreal landscapes. The Ghostbusters discover that the barriers between the human world and the demonic dimension are weakening and threaten to merge the two realities. So to combat this, they have to go into Manhattan, confront Lucifer, and prevent his invasion of the real world. The movie went into development with the intention of Reitman producing and Harold Ramis directing, but in December 1997, Chris Farley passed away and the movie was put on hold. The Stage Show. For 6 years between 1990 and 96, there was another Ghostbusters story. Sort of. The Ghostbusters Spooktacular was a live stage show at Universal Studios Florida. Based on the Ghostbusters films, it often featured disbelieving tour guides getting caught up in things going wrong, with special effects and live actors reenacting scenes, including battles against Gozer and the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. The stories changed through the years and at one point even crossed over with Beetlejuice, with him causing trouble that needed busting. Ghostbusters the video game. In 2009 we got Ghostbusters the video game, which reunited the original cast to voice their characters and followed a new story written by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis. It's widely regarded as the spiritual sequel to the original, was loved by fans, and was essentially Ghostbusters 3. Set in 1991, it follows the team as they investigate a surge in paranormal activity tied to Ivo Shandor, the Gozer-worshipping architect from the first film. A mysterious energy pulse revives old foes like Slimer and Stay Puft, leading the team to revisit iconic locations like the Sedgwick Hotel and the New York Public Library. The Ghostbusters uncover Shandor's plan to ascend to godhood and reshape the world using an ancient ghostly dimension known as the Lost Island. And there's even a nice little painting of Vigo in the Firehouse as a throwback to Ghostbusters II. The game was so popular that it was remastered in 2019 for modern machines. And now a new game called Spirits Unleashed came out in 2022, but it's mostly an online multiplayer that sees you battle ghosts, sort of in the vein of Fortnite, not really. It's fun and colourful, but doesn't really add to the Ghostbusters story. Ghostbusters 2016, open brackets, answer the call, close brackets. Now, there's a lot of controversy and hate around the 2016 reboot that I don't really want to add to. It took the classic lineup of 4 guy Ghostbusters and a female receptionist and inverted it. The trailer had over 1 million dislikes and divided fans before it was even released. Directed by Paul Feig, it would star Melissa McCarthy, Kristen Wiig, Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones as 4 women who team up to investigate a surge in ghostly activity in New York City. They discover a disgruntled man named Rowan using technology to amplify paranormal energy and open a portal to unleash ghosts on the world. As ghost sightings increase, the team battles supernatural threats and eventually confront Rowan, who becomes a giant ghost. Using their equipment, the Ghostbusters defeat him, close the portal, and save the city. The original Ghostbusters have small cameos, but it wasn't enough to save the film. Answer the Call wasn't necessarily a bad movie, just a bad Ghostbusters movie. It could have been a brilliant addition to the franchise, but seemed to misunderstand what made the originals great and loved. It had great visual effects and a style all of its own. It just wasn't what people associated with Ghostbusters. It wasn't bad because the cast were women or that Chris Hemsworth was a hot, dumb receptionist. It wasn't bad because it was woke or had a black Ghostbuster. It was bad because it tried to be a comedy when Ghostbusters was always more of a documentary that had characters that were amusing. Everyone was trying too hard to be a comic and make gags, and the whole thing just felt a bit naff and almost juvenile. However, nobody deserved the hate, certainly not the pathetic levels of misogynistic and racist anger directed towards the cast on platforms like Twitter. Bizarrely, even the Alliance of Women Film Journalists, a New York organisation dedicated to supporting work by women in the film industry, got involved in mocking it, nominating Melissa McCarthy for an award called Actress Most in Need of a New Agent. Ultimately, the film was said to need between $300 and $500 million just to break even, and it made only $220 million. The film's performance contributed to Sony taking a $1 billion write-down in January 2017. The cast and director had originally signed on for 2 sequels, but these were cancelled, although the story did continue in a limited series comic called Ghostbusters Answer the Call. There's also a comic series called Ghostbusters 101, featuring the original Ghostbusters teaming up with the 2016 team. Ghostbusters Afterlife. Thankfully, 5 years later in 2021, the franchise returned to form and the original storyline with Ghostbusters Afterlife. A true sequel to the first films, this movie brought a new generation of Ghostbusters to the screen while paying homage to the classic characters. Directed by Jason Reitman, son of original director Ivan Reitman, who produced this movie, Afterlife was a nostalgic return to form and a heartfelt tribute to Harold Ramis, who died in 2014. The plot sees a single mother and her 2 kids move to a small town and discover their connection to Egon Spengler. The children uncover Egon's hidden lab and equipment, learning he was preparing for an impending supernatural threat. With help from old friends, they face an old enemy's return. I'm not going to dive too deeply into the plot of this movie because I suspect a lot of people who listen to or watch this may not have seen it, and I cannot encourage you enough to watch it. I saw this in the cinema 4 times and I loved it each time, and I think I cried at every screening. I adore this movie. It's wonderful. The Reitmans did such an amazing job at continuing the story in a fresh way. The cast are wonderful. McKenna Grace is the heart of the movie and does a mind-blowing job at 13 years old to carry it and honour the memory of Harold Ramis. We also get Finn Wolfhard from Stranger Things, Carrie Coon and Paul Rudd in the main cast, with small roles for Josh Gad, J.K. Simmons and Olivia Wilde. Tiny little roles. It kicks off with a tense and exciting opening scene that might be one of the greatest in the franchise, brings back classic characters, feels like an 80s movie and has so much heart. Yet again, Ghostbusters felt grounded, taking the subject matter seriously but approaching it with humour at the right times in subtle ways. Finding out about the original characters, seeing Ecto-1 again, and uncovering more about the myths of the 80s world we knew, which includes Ivo Shandor, who was key to the first film, is just a really great journey. The team used some old filmmaking techniques and brought people back who worked on the 84 movie, but they also bring new things in along the way, like the way ghosts interact with proton beams. Oh, and the sound of the neutron ones igniting is epic and just as explosive as the original. Even the music was scored to feel familiar to the original, bringing in Elmer Bernstein's son Peter as score consultant. This might be the best passing of the torch to a new generation movie ever made. It was made for $70 million, and despite being delayed 4 times due to COVID, made just over $200 million at the box office. The ending also nicely set up a sequel. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Jason Reitman stepped back from directing the sequel after the death of his father in 2022, handing over the reins to Gil Kenan, who was his partner on Afterlife, though they would both write the script. Almost all the characters, old and new, come back with new cast members like James Acaster, who doesn't sound like a good fit but is a good addition, along with Kumail Nanjiani and Patton Oswalt. But the biggest character return is New York City and the iconic Firehouse. This movie revolves around an ancient artifact that unleashes an evil force, threatening to plunge the world into a second ice age. Together, both generations of Ghostbusters must confront a new threat to save their home and the world. It has a vibe with the Real Ghostbusters about it, in a good way, and a new character played by Emily Allen Lind takes the lore in a new direction that's very welcome, but won't talk about spoilers in this show. It's a different type of movie to Afterlife, and I love it almost as much. It made about the same money as its predecessor, though it cost a little bit more to make, but it's still managing to rake in twice what it cost. Director Gil Kenan said a sequel is in development, and I can't wait to see what they come up with. But there are also plenty more stories that already exist. The comics. Various comic series have expanded the Ghostbusters universe. These comics explored alternate realities, crossovers, and other franchises, and new ghostly threats. They include adventures with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Transformers, the X-Files, and even the OG Ghostbusters, meeting the Real Ghostbusters. There's a couple of series I want to mention that seem particularly interesting, and I'm just going to read the synopsis. The first is Ghostbusters Displaced Aggression from 2009. The Busters have been defeated by the pan-dimensional demon Lord Kozarai, father of Gozer. The villain has separated them across the time stream. Dr. Peter Venkman is trapped in 1886, and his only chance to return to present-day Earth and free all of humanity has him teaming up with a very unexpected, open brackets, and very beautiful, close brackets, ally. The other one is Ghostbusters Year 1 from 2020. This looks back, I'm just going to read the synopsis again. It looks back at the boys in Grey's first year on the job, showcasing never-before-seen adventures. After defeating Gozer and becoming heroes in the city, county, and state of New York, a publisher has decided to cash in with a biography of the boys in Grey and sends a writer to interview them all for background. He starts with Winston Zeddemore, the first buster hired into the supernatural startup. Winston relates the story of his first bust so we can finally know what kind of stuff he's seen that will turn you white. The Firehouse. The last thing I'll say about Ghostbusters is I was lucky enough to go to New York a couple of years ago and managed to go and see the Firehouse one night. It was a very special and surreal moment, and I just found myself taking it all in and struggled to tear myself away. The fire crews that work in the station at Hook and Ladder 8, which is a working firehouse, were even kind enough to switch on the lights to the Ghostbusters sign that hangs outside. So please, watch Aftermath and Frozen Empire if you haven't already, and if you're a big fan and get the chance to see the Firehouse, then go do it. Anyway, join me next week when AJ will be back for the main Rewind show, where we'll be going to 1986 to talk about a film where an absolutely useless American trucker thinks he's the hero while surrounded by Chinese kung fu fighters who are taking on mythical gods and a randy old sorcerer. I cannot wait. Sorry about the mess. See you next time.